Rain lashed the asphalt as flashing headlights cut through the dense fog. A baby cried in the back seat, oblivious to the grim fate that awaited them around the next bend. As the car descended the slope, the silence was broken only by the distant barking of a lone dog. But the real danger was just beginning, hidden in the shadows and forgotten memories of that mountain. Before listening to this true story, remember to subscribe to the channel for more exciting stories like this. Night fell on the Blue Ridge Mountains like a dark and threatening cloak. The sky, once sprinkled with stars, was covered with thick clouds that promised an unprecedented storm. On the winding road that snaked between the jagged peaks, a car advanced with difficulty, its headlights barely penetrating the dense fog that crept along the asphalt. Inside the vehicle, Mark and Sarah Thompson argued in low voices, trying not to wake their 6-month-old son, Ethan, who slept peacefully in his car seat in the back seat. "Mark, we should stop," Sarah insisted, her voice tense with worry. "This storm is getting worse by the minute." Mark gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. "We can't stop now, Sarah. You know how important it is to arrive on time. Ethan's future depends on it." Sarah looked back, watching her baby sleep oblivious to the danger surrounding them. Her heart clenched at the thought of what they were about to do. "Are you sure this is the right thing? What if something goes wrong?" "We have no choice," Mark replied, his voice firm but laden with emotion. "It's the only way to protect him. Doctor Winters assured us that the procedure is safe." A lightning bolt illuminated the sky, followed almost instantly by deafening thunder. Ethan woke up startled, his cry filling the car. Sarah turned to calm him, but at that moment, Mark shouted, "Watch out!" A tree, felled by the wind, fell onto the road right in front of them. Mark turned the steering wheel sharply, trying to dodge it. The car skidded on the wet asphalt, spinning out of control. Sarah screamed, protectively hugging Ethan's seat. The world became a whirlwind of lights and shadows as the vehicle veered off the road, rolling down the steep slope. When the car finally stopped, it was overturned at the bottom of a ravine. The silence that followed was broken only by Ethan's faint cry and the relentless pounding of rain on the twisted metal. Miles away, at a military base hidden deep in the mountains, Colonel Jack Harris watched a screen with a frown. A blinking red dot on the digital map had just disappeared. "Sir," said a young technician, "we've lost the signal from the Thompsons' vehicle." Harris cursed under his breath. "Send a rescue team immediately. We can't allow the project to be lost." In another room at the base, Dr. Eleanor Winters startled when she heard the alarm. Her heart raced as she understood what it meant. Years of research, ethical sacrifices, and dark secrets, all hanging by a thread. And at the center of it all, an innocent baby whose fate had just taken an unexpected turn. Meanwhile, deep in the storm-lashed forest, a pair of bright eyes opened in the darkness. Thunder, an imposing Belgian Malinois, raised his head, his ears erect, catching a sound that no human could perceive. Something inside him, a connection that went beyond the explicable, drove him to move. With determination, the dog ventured into the stormy night, guided by an instinct that defied all logic. His firm paws led him towards an unknown destination, towards an encounter that would change the course of history. As Thunder approached the accident site, the rain began to subside. The smell of gasoline and twisted metal filled his nostrils, mixing with something else, something that awakened in him a primal protective instinct. Cautiously, the dog approached the overturned car. His eyes, trained to detect the slightest movement, fixed on a small hand that was weakly waving from a broken window. Ethan's cry, barely audible, was like a beacon in the darkness for Thunder. Without hesitation, the Belgian Malinois began to dig and bite at the twisted metal, ignoring the pain when sharp edges cut his muzzle. With each passing second, Ethan's cry grew weaker, and Thunder redoubled his efforts. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Thunder managed to open a hole big enough. Gently, he took Ethan's blanket between his teeth and pulled, removing the baby from the wrecked car. Just as Thunder was moving away from the vehicle with Ethan in tow, an explosion lit up the night. The car, with Mark and Sarah still trapped inside, turned into a fireball. Thunder flinched, instinctively protecting the baby with his body. At that moment, the dog made a decision that defied his training and his nature. Instead of waiting for the rescue team to arrive, Thunder headed into the forest with Ethan. Something inside told him that the baby would not be safe if they found him. As Thunder moved away, the flames from the wrecked car cast dancing shadows on the trees. The fire consumed not only the vehicle, but also the evidence of a secret that many would want to keep hidden. At the military base, Dr. Winters watched in horror the satellite images of the accident. "It can't be," she muttered, her mind working at full speed. "The locator chip, it's not working." Colonel Harris entered the room, his face a mask of barely contained fury. "Doctor, what the hell is going on? Where is the child?" Eleanor swallowed hard, aware that she was about to unleash a storm even more dangerous than the one raging outside. "Colonel, there's something you need to know about Project Guardian." Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Thunder advanced with determination, carrying Ethan towards an uncertain destination. The baby, calmed by the dog's soft fur and warmth, had stopped crying. What none of those involved knew was that this was only the beginning. The forces of nature, science, and destiny had been set in motion, intertwining the lives of a dog, a baby, and a group of people in a web of secrets, loyalties, and discoveries that would shake the foundations of what they believed they knew about intelligence, the connection between species, and the limits of scientific ethics. As the night progressed, the storm began to subside, but a new tempest, more dangerous and profound, was about to break out in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Dawn broke over the Blue Ridge Mountains, revealing the devastation left by the storm. At the hidden military base, Colonel Jack Harris paced like a caged lion in front of Dr. Elena Winters' desk. "Explain to me again, Doctor, how is it possible that we've lost the most valuable subject of our project?" growled Harris, his eyes bloodshot from lack of sleep. Elena took a deep breath, trying to maintain her composure. "Colonel, the locator chip in Ethan was experimental. There was always a possibility it could fail under extreme conditions. And what about the dogs? Wasn't the neural link supposed to lead them directly to the child?" The doctor visibly tensed. "The link, it's complicated. It's not a simple electronic leash. The dogs in Project Guardian have a level of autonomy that—" Harris slammed his fist on the desk, making Elena jump. "Enough excuses. We have to find that child before someone else does. Do you have any idea what would happen if the press got wind of this?" At that moment, a young lieutenant rushed into the office. "Sir, we found something at the accident site." Harris and Elena exchanged a tense look before following the lieutenant to the laboratory. There, on an examination table, lay several fragments of twisted metal and charred fabric. "These are the remains we were able to recover from the vehicle," explained the lieutenant. "But there's something else." He pointed to a screen showing the magnification of one of the metal pieces. "We found traces of canine DNA on the sharp edges. It seems a dog was in contact with the car after the accident." Elena felt her heart racing. "Can you identify the dog?" The lieutenant nodded. "It's one of ours. Thunder." Harris turned to Elena, his eyes shining with a mixture of triumph and suspicion. "It seems your complicated link worked after all, Doctor. Now what aren't you telling me about this particular dog?" Meanwhile, miles away, Thunder cautiously advanced through the dense forest, with Ethan still protected between his jaws. The dog was exhausted and hungry, but a primal instinct drove him forward. Suddenly, Thunder stopped dead in his tracks. His ears perked up, catching a familiar sound. In the distance, the unmistakable buzz of a helicopter broke the silence of the forest. With renewed urgency, Thunder changed direction, heading into a denser area of the forest. His paws instinctively led him towards a rocky formation that rose among the trees. There, hidden by vegetation, he found the entrance to a small cave. Without hesitation, Thunder entered the darkness of the cave, carrying Ethan with him. The baby, who had remained surprisingly calm during the journey, began to stir, hungry and uncomfortable. Thunder gently placed Ethan on the cave floor and began to lick his face tenderly, trying to calm him, but the baby's cry grew louder, echoing off the rock walls. Outside the cave, the sound of the helicopter intensified. Thunder tensed, torn between the instinct to protect Ethan and the need to keep them hidden. It was then that something unexpected happened. Ethan, in the midst of his crying, extended a small hand and touched Thunder's muzzle. In that instant, an electric current seemed to course through the dog's body. His eyes met the baby's, and for a moment, the world seemed to stand still. In Thunder's mind, images and sensations began to flow. He saw sterile laboratories, heard voices discussing genetics and evolution, felt the fear and hope of Ethan's parents. And beyond all that, he perceived something deeper, a connection that transcended the barriers between species. Ethan's crying ceased abruptly. The baby looked at Thunder with an intensity uncharacteristic of his age, as if he too was experiencing the same connection. Outside the cave, the helicopter passed by, its sound fading into the distance. But Thunder barely noticed. His entire world had been reduced to that moment, to that connection with the small human being now sleeping peacefully by his side. At the military base, Eleanor Winters found herself alone in her laboratory, frantically reviewing classified files on her computer. Her hands trembled slightly as she opened folder after folder. "It has to be here," she muttered to herself. "The key to everything." Finally, she found what she was looking for, a file titled Project Genesis. As she opened it, her eyes widened. "It can't be," she whispered, her voice barely audible. On the screen, next to complex formulas and genetic diagrams, was a photo of Ethan as a newborn, and below, a series of codes that Elena had never seen before. Suddenly, the laboratory door burst open. Colonel Harris entered, followed by 2 armed guards. "Dr. Winters," said Harris with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I think it's time we had a very serious conversation about the true scope of Project Guardian." Elena quickly closed the computer, but she knew it was too late. Harris's expression told her he had seen enough. "Colonel, I can explain," Eleanor began, but Harris raised a hand to silence her. "Oh, I'm sure you can, Doctor, and you will, but not here." He gestured to the guards. "Take her to the underground bunker. We have a lot to talk about." As the guards escorted her out of the laboratory, Eleanor couldn't help but think of Ethan and Thunder, lost somewhere in the vast mountains. "God protect them," she murmured to herself, aware that she had unleashed forces that even she didn't fully understand. Far away, in an isolated cabin deep in the forest, a man woke up with a start. Jason Vega, former trainer of the Guardians of the Earth program, sat up in his bed, his forehead beaded with sweat. He had had a dream so vivid that he could still feel its impact. In it, he saw Thunder, one of his most promising dogs, running through the forest with something in his mouth. And beyond, a storm was approaching, bringing with it a danger that went beyond the natural. Jason got up and walked to the window. The forest was quiet, but something in the air felt different. An uneasiness he couldn't explain took hold of him. "After all these years," he muttered to himself, "why now?" Without thinking twice, Jason began to pack a backpack. He didn't know exactly what was driving him, but something inside told him he had to return to the mountains. That Thunder and something else needed him. As he prepared to leave, Jason couldn't imagine that he was about to become involved in a plot that would test not only his loyalty, but also his understanding of the relationship between humans and animals. The sun began to rise over the Blue Ridge Mountains, illuminating a new day full of mysteries to solve and dangers to face. And somewhere in that vast territory, a dog and a baby slept together in a cave, oblivious to the forces mobilizing to find them. The morning sun filtered through the treetops, creating a mosaic of light and shadow on the forest floor. Thunder cautiously emerged from the cave, his senses on high alert. Behind him, Ethan slept peacefully, wrapped in the blanket that had miraculously survived the accident. The Belgian Malinois sniffed the air, catching a mix of scents, damp earth, vegetation, and something else. A metallic and artificial smell that didn't belong to the forest. His muscles tensed instinctively. Inside the cave, Ethan began to stir, his tiny fists rubbing his sleepy eyes. Thunder quickly returned to his side, gently licking the baby's cheek. To his surprise, instead of crying, Ethan let out a giggle, his eyes fixed on the dogs with a disconcerting intensity. Suddenly, Thunder felt a wave of hunger, but it wasn't his own hunger. The sensation seemed to come from Ethan. The dog blinked, confused. How was it possible that he could feel the baby's needs? With no time to reflect on this new development, Thunder made a decision. They needed to move, find food, and a safer place. Gently, he took Ethan's blanket between his teeth and left the cave. Meanwhile, several miles away, Jason Vega advanced along a barely visible trail. his backpack loaded with supplies and his mind full of unanswered questions. Each step he took seemed to resonate with a purpose he didn't yet fully understand. Suddenly, a movement in his peripheral vision made him stop. Among the bushes, a pair of eyes watched him. Jason held his breath as a grey wolf emerged from the vegetation. "Easy, friend," Jason murmured, his years of experience with animals manifesting in his calm voice. The wolf stared at him as if evaluating him. Then, to Jason's amazement, the animal slightly tilted its head and trotted away. Jason stood still, processing what had just happened. In all his years in the mountains, he had never seen a wolf behave like that. It was as if his thoughts were interrupted by the distant sound of a helicopter. Instinctively, Jason crouched down, hiding under the canopy of trees. What was going on in the mountains? At the military base, Colonel Harris watched with growing frustration the monitors showing the progress of the search. "How is it possible that we haven't found anything yet?" he growled, hitting the console with his fist. Beside him, a young technician nervously swallowed. "Sir, the terrain is very difficult, and the chip signal is intermittent at best." Harris turned to him, his eyes dangerously bright. "Find a way to amplify that signal. Use whatever is necessary. Satellites, drones, anything. I want that child and that dog found yesterday." In an adjacent room, Dr. Elena Winters sat in a metal chair, her wrists handcuffed to the table in front of her. Her mind worked frantically, trying to find a way out of the impossible situation she found herself in. The door opened, and a man Elena didn't recognize entered. He wore an impeccable suit and carried a leather briefcase. "Dr. Winters," the man said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes, "I'm Dr. Alexander Morgan from the Department of Defense. We have a lot to talk about." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. If the Department of Defense was involved, things were even more serious than she had imagined. Meanwhile, deep in the forest, Thunder stopped by a crystal-clear stream. Carefully, he placed Ethan on a bed of soft leaves and began to drink water eagerly. The baby watched every movement of the dog with a fascination that seemed to go beyond his age. Thunder raised his head, water drops dripping from his muzzle, and looked at Ethan. Again, he felt that strange connection, as if he could perceive the baby's needs and emotions. Without hesitation, the dog ventured into the forest, his nose working overtime. Minutes later, Thunder returned with a handful of wild berries in his mouth. He placed them in front of Ethan, and with infinite patience began to crush them with his paw, creating a sort of rudimentary puree. Ethan extended his little hands towards the improvised food, and Thunder helped him bring it to his mouth. As the baby ate, the dog felt a wave of satisfaction that wasn't entirely his own. Suddenly, a rustle in the nearby bushes put Thunder on high alert. He positioned himself protectively in front of Ethan, his teeth bared in a silent growl. From among the vegetation emerged a figure Thunder didn't expect to see. Another dog. It was Shadow, a German shepherd who had been part of the same training program as Thunder. The two dogs looked at each other intently, a silent conversation passing between them. Shadow tilted her head, as if acknowledging Thunder's mission, and then directed her gaze towards Ethan. At that moment, something extraordinary happened. Ethan extended his hand towards Shadow, and just as it had happened with Thunder, an invisible connection seemed to establish itself. Shadow's eyes opened wide, as if she suddenly understood something fundamental. Thunder observed the exchange with a mixture of amazement and concern. What exactly was Ethan, and how would this new alliance affect his mission to protect him? As the three looked at each other, forming a triangle of trust and mystery, the distant sound of helicopter rotors broke the silence of the forest. The search was getting closer, and with it, dangers that none of them could fully imagine. Jason, guided by an instinct he couldn't explain, quickened his pace. Something told him that time was running out, that he needed to find Thunder and discover what was happening before it was too late. At the military base, Dr. Morgan placed a tablet in front of Elena. On the screen, a series of graphs and data blinked ominously. "Dr. Winters," Morgan said, his voice cold as ice, "it's time you tell us exactly what Project Genesis is, and what makes that child so special." Eleanor looked at the tablet, then at Morgan. She knew that what she said next would change the course of everything. With a deep sigh, she began to speak. Project Genesis is not just about improving animal intelligence or communication between species. It's something much bigger, something that could redefine the relationship between humans and animals forever. Morgan leaned forward, his eyes shining with a mixture of greed and fascination. "Continue, Doctor." In the forest, Thunder, Shadow, and Ethan began to move, guided by a mutual understanding that defied logic. As they advanced, the forest animals seemed to react strangely to their presence, as if they perceived something out of the ordinary. The sun began to descend on the horizon, tinting the sky in orange and purple hues. Night was approaching, bringing with it new dangers and revelations that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew. Night fell over the Blue Ridge Mountains like a black velvet cloak, sprinkled with bright stars. Deep in the forest, Thunder and Shadow advanced stealthily, with Ethan nestled between them. The baby, surprisingly calm, seemed to instinctively understand the need to remain silent. As they entered a denser area of the forest, the night sounds subtly changed. The animals seemed to react to the presence of the strange trio, not with fear, but with an almost palpable curiosity. Owls turned their heads to follow their progress, small rodents peeked out from their burrows, and in the distance, a wolf's howl sounded like a question in the night. Thunder suddenly stopped, his ears erect, catching a sound that only he could hear. Shadow, understanding the signal, gently took Ethan between her jaws and hid under a dense bush. Thunder cautiously advanced towards the source of the sound. About 100 meters away, Jason Vega was camping for the night. Sitting in front of a small campfire, the former trainer mentally reviewed the events that had led him there. His thoughts were interrupted by a rustle in the darkness. "Who's there?" he asked, his hand instinctively moving towards the knife on his belt. From among the shadows emerged a familiar figure. Jason held his breath. "Thunder? Is that you, boy?" The Belgian Malinois advanced towards the firelight, his eyes fixed on Jason with an intensity the man had never seen before. For a moment, both remained motionless, assessing each other. Finally, Thunder stepped forward and rested his head on Jason's knee. The gesture, so familiar and at the same time so laden with new meanings, brought tears to the man's eyes. "What's happened, friend?" Jason murmured, stroking Thunder's fur. "What are you doing here?" In response, Thunder turned and looked towards the darkness of the forest, then back at Jason. The message was clear. "Follow me." Meanwhile, at the military base, Dr. Eleanor Winters found herself at a crossroads. In front of her, Dr. Morgan waited impatiently for her explanation about Project Genesis. Elena took a deep breath and began. Project Genesis started as an attempt to improve communication between humans and animals. But as we progressed, we discovered something extraordinary. Not only could we enhance animal intelligence, but we could create a neural bridge between species. Morgan leaned forward, intrigued. "A neural bridge? What does that mean exactly?" "It means, Doctor Morgan, that we managed to create a direct connection between the human and animal brain. But not just that. We discovered that certain individuals, both human and animal, had a genetic predisposition for this connection. Ethan. Ethan is the result of years of research and genetic modification. Are you saying that this child can control animals?" Elena shook her head. "It's not that simple. It's not control. It's communication. Empathy at a level we had never before imagined possible. But there's more." At that moment, an alarm began to sound at the base. Colonel Harris burst into the room, his face a mask of fury and concern. "The security systems have been breached," he growled. "Someone has accessed the classified files of Project Genesis from outside the base." Elena paled. There was only one person besides her who knew the access codes, her former colleague and mentor, Dr. Samuel Reed. But he had disappeared years ago, or at least that's what she thought. In the forest, Jason followed Thunder with his heart racing. When they reached the bush where Shadow and Ethan were hiding, the former trainer was left breathless. "My God," he whispered upon seeing the baby. "What's going on here?" Before he could process the situation, a familiar sound broke the silence of the night. Helicopters approaching. Thunder and Shadow were immediately on alert. Jason, acting on instinct, took Ethan in his arms. "We have to move," he said urgently. As the group ventured deeper into the forest, something extraordinary began to happen. The forest animals seemed to react to their presence, not with fear, but as if they were responding to a silent call. Birds flew in strange formations above them, small mammals ran alongside their feet, and in the distance, the howling of wolves sounded like a guiding chorus. Jason looked at Ethan, whose eyes shone with an intelligence that went beyond his age. "What are you, little one?" he murmured, half amazed, half terrified. Suddenly, a blinding light illuminated the clearing in front of them. A helicopter descended, the wind from its rotors violently shaking the vegetation. Thunder and Shadow positioned themselves protectively in front of Jason and Ethan, their teeth bared in a threatening growl. A figure that Jason immediately recognized descended from the aircraft. Dr. Samuel Reed, the brilliant and enigmatic scientist who had disappeared years ago. "Jason," Reed shouted over the noise of the helicopter, "I need you to listen to me. That child is the key to everything. We can't allow him to fall into the wrong hands." Before Jason could respond, the sound of more helicopters approaching filled the air. Colonel Harris and his men were close. Reed looked frantically around. "There's no time for explanations. You have to come with me now. I know a safe place." Jason hesitated, torn between distrust and the need to protect Ethan. Thunder and Shadow, however, seemed to have made a decision. Both dogs moved towards the helicopter, as if understanding it was their best option. With his heart pounding, Jason made a decision that would change the course of everything. "All right," he said, following the dogs towards the helicopter. "But you owe me a lot of explanations, Samuel." As the helicopter rose, Jason looked down and saw the forest animals gathering in the clearing, as if saying goodbye. In his arms, Ethan extended a small hand towards them, and for a moment, Jason swore he saw a flash of light connecting the baby with the creatures below. The helicopter quickly moved away, leaving behind the forest and the pursuers. But as they headed towards the unknown, Jason couldn't help but wonder, were they escaping from danger or heading straight towards it? At the military base, Colonel Harris received the news of the escape with barely contained fury. "Find them," he roared at his team. "Use all available resources. That child and those dogs cannot disappear." Dr. Elena Winters, still handcuffed, watched the scene with a mixture of fear and hope. She knew that what happened in the next few hours would determine not only Ethan's fate, but possibly the future of the relationship between humans and animals across the planet. As the helicopter vanished into the night, carrying Jason, Ethan, Thunder, and Shadow, a new phase of the adventure began. A phase filled with revelations, dangers, and discoveries that would shake the foundations of everything they thought they knew about intelligence, empathy, and the bonds that unite all living creatures. The helicopter soared through the night sky, leaving behind the dense vegetation of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Jason Vega, with Ethan firmly held in his arms, watched through the window as the landscape gradually changed. Thunder and Shadow remained alert at his feet, their eyes fixed on Dr. Samuel Reed, who piloted the aircraft with intense concentration. "Where are you taking us, Samuel?" Jason shouted over the noise of the rotors. Reed turned his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "To a place I built years ago when I realized what Project Genesis really meant. I call it the Sanctuary." After what seemed like an eternity, the helicopter began to descend towards a hidden valley between high mountains. As they approached, Jason could make out a series of structures camouflaged among the vegetation. It was as if someone had built a research complex in the middle of nowhere and then hidden it from the world. The helicopter landed on a concealed platform. As soon as the rotors stopped, a group of people emerged from the nearby structures. To Jason's surprise, not all of them were human. Alongside scientists and technicians, there was a variety of animals: dogs, monkeys, even a pair of dolphins in a nearby tank. They all seemed to move with a purpose and intelligence that went beyond normal. "Welcome to the Sanctuary," said Reed as they descended from the helicopter. "The only place in the world where the true potential of Project Genesis can be explored without the ethical and moral limitations imposed by governments and corporations." Jason, still stunned by recent events, followed Reed into the complex, with Thunder and Shadow glued to his heels. Ethan, surprisingly calm, observed everything with curious eyes. At the center of the complex was a massive laboratory, filled with state-of-the-art equipment and screens displaying complex data. Reed guided them to an adjoining room, more cozy with sofas and a small kitchen. "Sit down," said Reed, pointing to the sofas. "We have a lot to talk about." As Jason settled in, with Ethan on his lap and the dogs at his feet, Reed began his explanation. Project Genesis started as an attempt to improve communication between species, but we soon discovered something much deeper. We could not only enhance animal intelligence, but we could create a neural bridge between humans and animals. Ethan is the result of years of research, a human being with the innate ability to mentally connect with any animal. Jason looked at the baby in his arms, a mixture of awe and concern on his face. "Are you saying that Ethan can control animals?" Reed shook his head. "It's not control, it's communication. Empathy at a level we had never before imagined possible. But there's more. Ethan can not only connect with animals, but he can enhance their intelligence and abilities. It's as if his presence accelerated the evolution of the species around him." At that moment, a capuchin monkey entered the room, carrying a tray with coffee cups. With surprising precision, it served a cup for each adult present, and then withdrew with a bow. Jason blinked, amazed. "How is this possible?" "Years of work and experimentation," Reed replied. "But what you see here is just the surface. The true potential of this technology is limitless. Imagine a world where humans and animals can communicate freely, where we can understand the needs of ecosystems directly from the creatures that inhabit them. We could solve environmental crises, develop new forms of medicine, even explore space with the help of creatures adapted to extreme conditions." Jason listened, fascinated and horrified in equal parts. "But why run? Why all this secrecy?" Reed's face darkened. "Because not everyone sees the potential of this technology for good. Colonel Harris and his superiors see Ethan as a weapon, a way to create armies of mentally controlled animals. And there are others, corporations and governments, who would want to use this technology for their own selfish ends." Suddenly, an alarm began to sound throughout the complex. Reed jumped up and ran to one of the screens. "It can't be," he muttered. "They've found us." On the security screens, helicopters could be seen approaching the valley. Colonel Harris had tracked their location faster than they had anticipated. "We have to move," Reed said urgently. "There's a system of tunnels under the complex. It will lead us to a safe place." As they prepared to evacuate, Ethan began to stir in Jason's arms. The baby extended his hands towards Thunder and Shadow, and suddenly a faint light seemed to emanate from his fingers. Jason watched, amazed, as the dog's eyes shone with a new intelligence. Without a word, Thunder and Shadow headed towards the laboratory doors, as if they knew exactly what to do. "It's happening," whispered Reed, a mixture of fear and excitement in his voice. "Ethan is evolving. His connection with the animals is strengthening." As the group hurried towards the tunnels, followed by an entourage of animals from the sanctuary, Jason couldn't help but wonder what he was getting into. Were they really protecting Ethan and safeguarding a revolutionary discovery? Or were they unleashing forces that humanity wasn't prepared to handle? The sound of the helicopters grew louder, and time was running out. With Ethan in his arms and surrounded by creatures that seemed to act with supernatural intelligence, Jason entered the darkness of the tunnels towards an uncertain future, but full of astounding possibilities. Meanwhile, in one of the approaching helicopters, Colonel Harris observed the sanctuary with a mixture of greed and determination. "This time, they won't escape," he muttered. "Project Genesis is too valuable to leave in the hands of idealists and dreamers." What none of them knew was that the events that were about to unfold would forever change the course of human and animal history, unleashing a power that not even the creators of Project Genesis had fully imagined. The darkness of the tunnels enveloped Jason, Reed, Ethan and their entourage of animals as they ventured deeper and deeper into the earth. The echo of their footsteps resonated off the rock walls, mixing with the occasional sounds of the animals accompanying them. Thunder and Shadow led the group, their heightened senses guiding them through the subterranean labyrinth. Jason, with Ethan firmly held against his chest, couldn't help but marvel at the surreal scene surrounding him. Capuchin monkeys leaped from rock to rock, illuminating the way with small flashlights. A pair of parrots flew near the ceiling, their fluorescent feathers providing additional dim light. There was even a group of rats that seemed to be performing reconnaissance tasks, running ahead and returning with what appeared to be detailed reports for Reed. "Samuel," Jason whispered, trying not to disturb the tense silence surrounding them. "How is all of this possible? These animals, they're acting as if they were human?" Reed completed with a tired smile. "Not exactly. They're something else, something new. Ethan's presence has accelerated their evolution in a way that even I don't fully understand." Suddenly, Ethan began to stir in Jason's arms. His small eyes opened wide, glowing with a supernatural intensity in the gloom of the tunnel. A soft glow seemed to emanate from his skin, illuminating the space around him. All the animals stopped in unison, their eyes fixed on the baby. Even Thunder and Shadow turned, as if waiting for instructions. "It's happening," Reed murmured, a mixture of awe and concern in his voice. "Ethan is awakening to his true potential." At that moment, a tremor shook the tunnel. Dust and small rocks fell from the ceiling, and the distant sound of explosions reached them. "Harris," Reed growled. "They must be using explosives to open an entrance to the tunnels." Jason looked around, searching for an exit. "How far is it to a safe place?" Before Reed could respond, Ethan extended his small hands towards the tunnel walls. To everyone's amazement, the rocks began to move, rearranging themselves as if they were pieces of a living puzzle. In a matter of seconds, a new opening appeared in the wall, revealing a hidden passage. Thunder and Shadow, without hesitating for an instant, entered the new tunnel. The rest of the animals followed them, as if receiving silent instructions from Ethan. "Incredible," Jason whispered, following the animals with Ethan in his arms. Reed, still stunned by what he had just witnessed, brought up the rear. "This goes beyond everything we had theorized. Ethan not only communicates with animals, but he seems to have some kind of control over matter itself." As they advanced through the new passage, the environment began to change. The air became fresher and more humid, and a faint bluish glow illuminated the walls. Finally, the tunnel opened into a huge underground cavern. A crystal-clear lake occupied the center, surrounded by bioluminescent vegetation that seemed to pulse with its own life. On the shores of the lake, diverse species of animals coexisted in perfect harmony. Deer drank alongside jaguars, tropical birds nested near snakes, and in the water, colorful fish swam alongside small caimans. "The underground Eden," Reed said with reverence. "I never thought it really existed. It was a legend among the scientists of Project Genesis, a place where all species coexisted in perfect peace." Jason observed the scene, amazed. "How is this possible?" "I believe," Reed replied, looking at Ethan, "that we've just met its creator." The baby in Jason's arms gurgled happily, extending his hands towards the lake. Instantly, the water began to glow with even greater intensity, and all the animals in the cavern directed their attention towards them. Suddenly, a voice resonated in the minds of Jason and Reed. It wasn't a human voice, but a mixture of natural sounds. The murmur of water, the whisper of wind through leaves, the beating of thousands of hearts in unison. "Welcome," said the voice. "We have been waiting for you." Jason looked at Reed, seeking an explanation, but the scientist seemed as amazed as he was. Who are you?" Jason asked, his voice trembling slightly. The voice responded, "We are the collective consciousness of this place, awakened and unified by the one you call Ethan. He is the bridge, the nexus between all forms of life." Ethan laughed, a pure and crystalline sound that seemed to make the entire cavern vibrate. Around him, the animals approached, forming a protective circle. Reed stepped forward, his scientific mind struggling to comprehend what he was witnessing. "Are you saying that Ethan created all this?" "No," the voice replied. "This place has existed since time immemorial, but Ethan has awakened its true potential, has united the scattered consciousnesses into a single entity. And now, we are ready to evolve together." Before they could fully process this revelation, the sound of explosions once again shook the cavern. Harris and his men were close. The collective voice spoke again. "Danger approaches. We must protect the Nexus. Prepare yourselves, for what is about to happen will change the course of history forever." Jason looked at Ethan, then at the animals surrounding them, and finally at Reed. In his eyes, he saw reflected the same thought that was crossing his mind. They were about to witness something extraordinary, something that would defy everything they thought they knew about life and consciousness. As the echo of the explosions grew closer, Ethan closed his eyes and extended his hands. A brilliant light began to emanate from his body, enveloping all those present. The battle for the future of evolution was about to begin. The underground Eden vibrated with a palpable energy as the light emanating from Ethan intensified, bathing the cavern in a supernatural glow. Jason, still holding the baby, felt as if he were at the epicenter of a cosmic earthquake. Around him, the animals moved with perfect synchronicity, forming complex patterns that seemed to weave a living tapestry of flesh and fur. Reed, his eyes wide open, tried to process what he was witnessing. It's as if the entire ecosystem were merging into a single conscious entity, he murmured, more to himself than to the others. Suddenly, the water from the lake began to rise, forming a crystalline column in the center of the cavern. Within it, images began to form, glimpses of a distant past where humans and animals coexisted in harmony, followed by scenes of separation, conflict, and finally, the promise of a reunion. The collective voice resonated in their minds again. What you are witnessing is the awakening of a planetary consciousness dormant for millennia. Ethan is the key, the catalyst that has allowed all forms of life to reconnect. Before they could fully assimilate this revelation, an explosion shook the entrance of the cavern. Through the dust and debris emerged Colonel Harris, followed by a squad of heavily armed soldiers. "Stop!" Harris shouted, his voice reverberating off the cave walls. "Hand over the child and all the research from Project Genesis. Now!" Jason instinctively held Ethan tighter against his chest, while Thunder and Shadow positioned themselves protectively in front of them, growling menacingly. The rest of the animals in the cavern also tensed, ready to defend their sanctuary. Reed stepped forward, interposing himself between Harris and Jason. "Colonel, you have no idea what you're interrupting here. This goes beyond any military project or personal ambition. We are witnessing the birth of a new era for all forms of life on this planet." Harris let out a derisive laugh. "Spare me your scientific delusions, Reed. That child and this technology belong to the government. Imagine the power we would have if we could control all the creatures on the planet. We would be invincible." At that moment, Ethan began to glow with a blinding intensity. Jason felt as if an electric current was coursing through his body, and suddenly, his mind expanded. He could feel the presence of every living being in the cavern, from the smallest insect to the imposing jaguar. More than that, he could sense their thoughts, their emotions, their very essence. And he wasn't the only one. He saw how the eyes of Harris and his soldiers opened wide, experiencing the same cosmic connection. The collective voice spoke once more, but this time, everyone in the cavern could hear it. This is the true power of Project Genesis. It's not about control or domination, but about union and understanding. Every living being is a vital part of a greater whole, and only together can we reach our true potential. Harris, visibly shocked, dropped his weapon. His soldiers did the same, as if suddenly the concept of violence seemed alien and repulsive to them. Jason, still holding Ethan, approached Harris. "Colonel, do you understand now? This isn't something that can be controlled or used as a weapon. It's a gift, an opportunity to heal the wounds between humanity and the rest of the natural world." Harris, with tears in his eyes, nodded slowly. I can feel it. It's as if I had been blind all my life, and now, finally, I could see." Reed joined them, his face illuminated by a mixture of wonder and hope. "This is just the beginning. Imagine what we could achieve if this connection extended to the entire planet. We could solve environmental crises, develop technologies in harmony with nature, even communicate with species we thought incapable of complex thought." As they spoke, the energy in the cavern began to change. The light emanating from Ethan expanded, enveloping all those present in a cocoon of pure energy. Jason felt as if he were being rebuilt at a cellular level, every fiber of his being vibrating in tune with the pulse of Earth itself. Suddenly, images began to flow in everyone's mind. Visions of a future where cities and forests coexisted in perfect harmony, where human technology seamlessly merged with the planet's natural systems. They saw extinct species being reborn, deserts transforming into oases, and oceans cleansing themselves of pollution. But they also saw the challenges, the resistance of those who would fear this change, the conflicts that would arise as humanity adapted to this new reality, and the overwhelming responsibility that would come with this new power. When the vision ended, everyone in the cavern looked at each other with a new understanding. They were no longer enemies or competitors, but parts of a greater whole, united by a common purpose. Ethan, still in Jason's arms, let out a giggle that seemed to echo throughout the cavern. The collective voice spoke one last time. The path ahead of you will not be easy, but together, you have the power to rewrite the destiny of this planet. The choice is yours. As the energy in the cavern began to stabilize, Jason, Reed, Harris, and all the others realized they were on the threshold of a new era. An era of collaboration between species, of communication without barriers, and of a deep understanding of the interconnection of all life. But with this new dawn came new questions. How would they introduce this change to the rest of the world? How would they handle the power and responsibility that came with this cosmic connection? And perhaps most importantly, how would they protect Ethan, the catalyst for all this change, as he grew and developed his amazing powers? As the group began to discuss their next steps, one thing was clear. The world they knew had changed forever, and the true challenge was just beginning. The days following the event in the underground Eden were a whirlwind of activity and discoveries. The group, now united by a shared understanding of their mission, established a base camp in the cavern. Jason, Reed, Harris, and a select team of scientists and military personnel worked tirelessly to understand and document the changes they were experiencing. Ethan, oblivious to the commotion he had caused, was growing at an accelerated rate. In a matter of weeks, the baby who could barely babble was now speaking fluently, not only in English but in a variety of animal languages that only those present in the cavern could understand. One morning, as Jason supervised Ethan playing with a group of different species' offspring, Reed approached with a tablet in hand, his face a mixture of excitement and concern. "Jason, you have to see this," he said, showing him the screen. "We've been monitoring the brain activity of everyone in the cavern, including the animals. Look at these patterns." Jason observed the graphs and data on the screen. Even with his limited scientific knowledge, he could see that something extraordinary was happening. "What does all this mean, Samuel?" Reed took a deep breath. "It seems that the connection Ethan established wasn't a one-time event. It's constantly evolving. Our brains, those of the animals, even the flora of the cavern, everything is changing, adapting, evolving at an unprecedented rate." Before Jason could respond, Harris joined them, his face grim. "We have a problem," he announced. "My superiors are losing patience. They want results, they want to know what's happening here. And they're not alone. Governments around the world have noticed the unusual activity in this region. It's only a matter of time before they come to investigate." The three men looked towards Ethan, who at that moment was conversing animatedly with a group of parrots. The scene would be comical if it weren't for the monumental implications it carried. "We can't keep this secret for much longer," Jason finally said. "The world needs to know what's happening here. It needs to prepare for the changes that are coming." Reed nodded slowly. "I agree. But we must be cautious. If the wrong information falls into the wrong hands, it could unleash panic," Harris completed. "Or worse, it could start a race to control and exploit this new evolution." At that moment, Ethan approached the group, his eyes shining with a wisdom that went far beyond his years. "Don't be afraid," the child said, his voice blending with the sounds of the cavern. "The change is already underway. It cannot be stopped, only guided." The three men looked at each other, once again amazed by the depth and maturity of Ethan's words. "What do you suggest we do, little one?" Jason asked, kneeling to be at the child's level. Ethan smiled, a smile that seemed to contain the wisdom of thousands of years. "We must show them, not with words or data, but with experiences. They must feel the connection as you felt it." Reed frowned. "But Ethan, we can't bring everyone to this cavern, and we don't know if the connection will work outside this place." "The cavern is not the source," Ethan replied calmly. It's just an amplifier. The true connection is in every living being, it just needs to be awakened. Harris, who had been listening silently, finally spoke. I have an idea, but it's risky. They all looked at him expectantly. Let's organize a press conference. We'll invite world leaders, renowned scientists, even skeptics and critics. We'll show them what we've discovered here, and then we'll allow them to experience the connection for themselves, Jason completed, understanding the plan. Reed nodded slowly. It's risky, yes, but it could be our best chance to introduce these changes to the world in a controlled manner. Ethan smiled again. It's a good plan. But remember, once the seed is planted, it will grow at its own pace. We won't be able to control how the world reacts or how this new consciousness expands. The following days were a frenzy of preparations. While Reed and his team worked on how to present their discoveries scientifically, Harris used his connections to organize the conference and ensure security. Jason, for his part, dedicated himself to working with Ethan and the animals, preparing them for the encounter with the outside world. Finally, the day of the conference arrived. A convention center in the nearest city was prepared for the event. Journalists, scientists, world leaders, and curious individuals from all over the planet gathered expectant. When Jason took the stage with Ethan by the hand, a silence fell over the audience. Thunder and Shadow flanked them, and behind them, a carefully chosen selection of animals from the underground Eden accompanied them. Ladies and gentlemen, Jason began, his voice trembling slightly, we are here to present you with a discovery that will change the course of human and animal history. But words are not enough to describe what we have experienced. So instead of talking, we will show you. With that, Ethan stepped forward. His eyes began to glow with that now familiar light, and a wave of energy expanded throughout the room. What happened next was etched in humanity's collective memory. In a matter of seconds, every person in the room felt the connection, the unity with all forms of life. They saw the world through an eagle's eyes, felt the earth beneath an elephant's feet, experienced the community of an ant colony. Cries of amazement, tears of joy, and expressions of pure wonder filled the room. And as the energy dissipated, Jason knew the world would never be the same again. But even as they celebrated this triumphant moment, Jason couldn't help but feel a twinge of concern. How would the world handle this new power? Would humanity rise to the challenge? As camera flashes illuminated the room and questions began to pour in, Jason looked at Ethan. The child returned his gaze with a serene smile, as if to say, "This is just the beginning." And it certainly was. The dawn of a new era had arrived, bringing with it promises of a bright future, but also unimaginable challenges. The true journey was just beginning. The months following the press conference were a whirlwind of changes on a global scale. The news of the interspecies connection spread like wildfire, unleashing a range of reactions from awe and celebration to fear and resistance. Jason, Reed, and Harris found themselves at the eye of the hurricane, traveling the world to educate, demonstrate, and in many cases, calm fears about this new reality. Ethan, now 3 years old, but with the wisdom of an elder, was the center of attention wherever they went. One morning, as they prepared for a meeting with the United Nations Security Council in New York, Jason watched Ethan play with Thunder and Shadow in the hotel garden. The child laughed as the dogs performed increasingly complex tricks, communicating in a silent language that only they understood. Reed approached, with visible dark circles under his eyes. "The latest reports are interesting," he said, handing a tablet to Jason. Jason reviewed the data, his eyes widening. "Is this accurate?" Reed nodded. "Completely. The deforestation rate in the Amazon has fallen by 80% in the last 3 months. Poachers in Africa are turning in their weapons en masse, saying they can no longer bear the emotional weight of their actions. And look at this. Endangered species populations are increasing at an unprecedented rate." "It's incredible," Jason murmured. "It's as if the entire planet were healing," Harris completed, joining the conversation. The once stoic colonel now wore an expression of permanent amazement on his face. "But not all the news is good. There's resistance." Jason frowned. "What kind of resistance?" Harris sighed. extremist religious groups that see the connection as an abomination against nature, corporations that fear losing profits as people become more aware of the impact of their actions on the environment, and of course those who simply fear the unknown. At that moment, Ethan approached the group, his face serious. "A storm is coming," the child said, his voice blending with the whisper of the wind. "We must be prepared." Before anyone could ask what he meant, a rumble shook the building, alarms began to sound, and chaos broke out in the streets. "To the basement now!" Harris shouted, his military instincts taking over. As the group ran towards safety, they saw through the windows a surreal scene. Birds of all species descending upon the city in perfect formations, as if they were a coordinated force. In the streets, dogs, cats, and even rats seemed to be working together, guiding people to safe areas. Once in the basement, Reed turned on a television. The news showed similar scenes around the world. Animals acting in a coordinated manner, protecting humans and confronting those who sought to do harm. "It's a planetary immune response," Reed whispered, amazed. "The planet is defending itself and all its creatures." Ethan, sitting quietly in the center of the room, closed his eyes. His body began to glow with that now familiar light, and everyone in the room felt a wave of calm and clarity. "It's not a battle," the child said, his voice resonating with the wisdom of thousands of years. "It's an awakening. Those who resist are like cells that don't recognize they are part of a larger organism. But with time and patience, even they will understand." For days, the world seemed to be on the brink of chaos. But gradually, as more and more people experienced the connection, the resistance began to diminish. Scenes of conflict gave way to images of cooperation and mutual understanding. In the weeks that followed, the world began to transform in ways no one had imagined. Entire cities were redesigned to coexist in harmony with nature. New technologies emerged, inspired by the collective wisdom of all species. Politics, economics, education. Everything began to evolve towards a paradigm of cooperation and sustainability. But with these positive changes, new challenges also arose. How to handle the rapid increase in animal intelligence? What to do with entire industries that were now considered harmful to planetary balance? How to redefine the concepts of rights and responsibilities in a world where all creatures were connected? One afternoon, as the group discussed these issues in their new headquarters in the renovated underground Eden, Ethan interrupted them. "The path ahead is long," said the child, his voice blending with the murmur of water and birdsong. "But every step we take together brings us closer to our true potential as living beings on this planet." Jason, Reed, and Harris looked at each other, aware that they were on the threshold of the greatest transformation in the history of life on Earth. The challenges were enormous, but the possibilities were endless. As the sun set over the underground Eden, bathing the cavern in golden hues, the group prepared for another night of planning and reflection. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The world would never be the same again, and they were at the center of this monumental change. 10 years had passed since that day when Ethan awakened the planetary consciousness. The world that Jason contemplated from the top of a hill in the renewed Eden was almost unrecognizable compared to the one he had known a decade ago. Cities, once gray masses of concrete, were now vibrant ecosystems where nature and civilization coexisted in perfect harmony. Vegetation-covered buildings rose towards the sky, their designs inspired by natural patterns. In the streets, humans and animals moved with a shared purpose, communicating in a language that transcended species barriers. Jason smiled as he watched a group of children playing in a nearby park. Alongside them, puppies of various species participated in the game, their minds connected in a network of empathy and mutual understanding. It was a spectacle that still amazed him, despite having seen it countless times. "It's beautiful, isn't it?" Ethan's voice, now a 13-year-old boy, pulled Jason from his thoughts. Jason nodded, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. "Sometimes I find it hard to believe how far we've come." Ethan smiled, his eyes shining with that ancient wisdom that had never left him. "And we still have a long way to go." Together they began to descend the hill towards the research complex that had grown around the original Eden. The place had become the nerve center of the new era, a meeting point for scientists, leaders, and thinkers from around the world. As they entered the main building, they were greeted by Reed and Harris. The years had left their mark on both men, but their eyes still shone with the same passion and determination. "Just in time," said Reed, guiding them towards a conference room. "We're about to start the annual Planetary Council meeting." The Planetary Council, an entity that would have been unimaginable a decade ago, brought together representatives of all species to discuss and decide on matters affecting the entire biosphere. Humans, great apes, cetaceans, and even representatives of species previously considered inferior all had a voice in this new world order. As they took their seats, Jason couldn't help but reflect on the path that had led them here. He remembered the initial challenges, the resistance of those who feared change, the struggles to redefine economic and political systems, the ethical debates about the limits of interspecies connection. But he also remembered the triumphs, the eradication of extreme poverty thanks to a more equitable distribution of resources, guided by the collective wisdom of all species, the reversal of climate change achieved through unprecedented cooperation between humans and nature, the flourishing of new forms of art and culture that celebrated the diversity of life in all its forms. The meeting began, and Ethan took the floor. Despite his youth, his presence commanded respect and attention. "Friends, family, conscious beings of all species," he began, his voice resonating with a force that went beyond the physical. "We gather today not only to celebrate what we have achieved, but to face the challenges that still lie ahead." Ethan proceeded to outline the next steps in the evolution of planetary consciousness, the expansion of the connection to ever deeper levels of the biosphere, including plants and microorganisms, the exploration of the possibilities of extending the connection beyond Earth to other worlds, and perhaps most importantly, the ongoing struggle to maintain the balance between unity and diversity, between connection and individuality. As Ethan spoke, Jason felt a mixture of pride and awe. The baby he had rescued from a burning car had become the architect of a new era for all life on Earth. At the conclusion of the meeting, the group headed to a terrace that offered a panoramic view of Eden and beyond. The sun was setting on the horizon, tinting the sky in golden and purple hues. "You know, Jason," said Ethan, his gaze lost in the horizon, "sometimes I wonder what would have happened if that night, in the midst of the storm, things had been different. If thunder hadn't found me, if you hadn't followed your instinct." Jason smiled, remembering the faithful Thunder, who now rested in a quiet corner of Eden, his legacy continued by generations of evolved dogs. "I think somehow everything would have found its way. You were the spark, Ethan, but the potential was always there in every living being." Ethan nodded, an enigmatic smile on his lips. "Perhaps you're right. Perhaps I was just the catalyst for something that was destined to happen." As the sun disappeared over the horizon, Jason reflected on the incredible journey his life had been. From dog trainer to guardian of an extraordinary child, to witness and participant in the most profound transformation in the history of life on Earth. The future was still uncertain, full of possibilities and challenges they couldn't even imagine. But as he watched Ethan, surrounded by an aura of peace and determination, Jason knew that whatever happened, life would find its way. The connection they had awakened was now an integral part of the fabric of existence, a legacy that would endure far beyond their individual lives. And so, as the first stars began to shine in the night sky, Jason, Ethan, Reed, and Harris remained silent, united not only with each other but with every living being on the planet. It was the end of a chapter, but the beginning of an even greater story, a story that would continue to unfold in the eons to come. Somewhere in the nearby forest, a wolf howled, its song blending with the whisper of the wind and the rustle of leaves. And at that moment, for an instant, everything was in perfect harmony.